Welcome back. We are continuing to cover this tragic situation. The three people shot and killed earlier this week on Grand Rapids South Side. We're now turning to the domestic violence aspect of this situation. Of course, each year, approximately 10 million to 12 million women and men become victims of domestic violence. Many, of course, feel trapped. They don't know what to do. Micah Johnston with the Domestic Violence Network is joining us live to talk more about this issue. Micah, of course, we know a significant amount of domestic violence goes unreported. Talk about that and why that is.
Sure. Well, obviously, there's all kinds of stigma around domestic violence. More than half of people will never call the police. People don't want to admit it's happening to them. They oftentimes, because the perpetrators of abuse use tactics of control and manipulation, they can convince the survivor and the victim to think that it's their fault. And so that makes asking for help really difficult.
So I guess in that situation that you're describing, what would you do, or what would you have that person do in the case that this is happening?
If trust is a hard thing, but if there's someone that they can trust, whether that's someone in their church, in their family, let them know what's happening. Domestic violence takes all kinds of forms, but it always has the potential to turn lethal. People live in domestic violence situations sometimes for years, and they may not realize that the risk they're at. And so if they can talk to people, learn the risk factors, learn how, the presence of a weapon, that, the existence of like past experiences of strangulation or threats can actually follow a predictable pattern that shows that DV can escalate to these kinds of homicides that we so tragically saw this week.
Yeah, of course, you brought up the situation earlier this week. I guess, what is your analysis from a domestic violence perspective of this situation, and how do you know the warning signs of something? I mean, this is a very severe case of what happened, but how can you tell the warning signs of maybe a domestic violence situation that's ongoing and you want to help somebody get through that?
Well, so I mean, I think as I said, uh, these kinds of this highly lethal instances of domestic violence, they follow a predictable pattern. And so some of the things that you can look for are threats. Like if you're experiencing it, or you have family members who you think are experiencing it, if they tell you that someone threatened to kill them or that they threatened to commit suicide, that's a strong indication that that could escalate into real lethal violence. Um, if the perpetrator has access to weapons, if there's been a sudden stress like the loss of a job or a separation, or maybe you're observing this from the outside and your loved one is seeming more isolated or less present, those are all warning signs, and you don't want to wait. If you have any feeling or thoughts of this, try to reach out to them in a safe way. Or if nothing else, you can contact local resources such as Safe Haven Ministries, the YWCA, and Puertas Abiertas to get advice. If you are living in this situation, it's just really important that you hear this message and you know that you're not alone and there are people that are willing to help. And DVAN is working not only with our survivor support agencies, but also with law enforcement and prosecutors. And there are leaders all over this county that are really working to improve our systems and how we respond to domestic violence. And I would say these kind of incidences of domestic violence, homicide especially.
Yeah, absolutely. Any final thoughts on this tragic situation and what you want the community to know when looking at this situation through their own lens? What do you want the community to know, and your final thoughts on what happened earlier this week?
Well, I mean, obviously, every individual tragedy deserves to be acknowledged. And so our thoughts are with the family of Jacqueline, Michael, and Cameron, um, first and foremost. But as a community, we also have to understand that this isn't just a one-off situation of like a bad apple, but that, as you mentioned, the statistics of domestic violence are incredible, right? 1 in 4 women, 1 in 7 men will experience it, and it can always turn lethal. And so we want people to understand this within the greater context so that they can be aware of it in their own lives and work with us and DVAN to prevent it and end it. It's not just one-off situations that happen to one family. It follows a pattern in our community. It is about, you know, the statistics just show that it affects more of us than we would like to admit. And so we have to try and understand how these situations can be predictable and how we can work together to prevent them.
Yeah, I'm also curious. You kind of brought up a good question from me. You know, there were children involved in this situation. Two, unfortunately, have passed in the situation. One, according to police, is still living, and it's a very small boy. Can you talk about how children grow up after these scenarios and how they deal with this, or maybe don't deal with this as they grow up after domestic violence situations? How does that affect them?
Yeah, I'm not a mental health expert, so I don't want to say too much, but we know that trauma, especially trauma to children, even infants, sometimes can just, it changes the course of their life, changes their relationship with violence. Um, Oftentimes, both people who abuse and people who are abused, experienced abuse as a child. And so preventing domestic violence, preventing deaths, it's about here and now, but it's also about future generations and helping to have less violence in the future. And so, I mean, my thoughts and prayers are with the survivor and this child, and I hope that he'll have the resources and our community will rally around him to, to help him continue with his life, given these very, very difficult circumstances.
Okay. And then just one more time, if we have folks just joining us and they need help, where can they find resources just from your organization or any organizations that might be helpful?
So DVAN itself, we do not provide direct service, but we work very closely with our partners, Safe Haven Ministries, YWCA of West Central Michigan, and Puertas Abiertas. I'll just give you Safe Haven's number, 616-452-6664. They have 24-hour advocacy, people who understand domestic violence, and they will walk with you, they will believe you, and they will help you find the safety and support that you need, always keeping the survivor empowered.
All right. Well, Micah Johnston, the director of the Domestic Violence Action Network, we appreciate your help and insight into this unfortunate situation. And of course, if you do need help, use those resources available to you. Micah, thank you.
Thank you.